Welcome to episode 2 of our 4th series on Sandy's Insight. We are going to learn about the family of Cain, Genesis 4, verse 16 to 25. And we'll be studying from the King James Version. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and named the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Methushel, and Methushel begat Lamech. Then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. And Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. And verse 22. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. In verse 23, then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. In verse 24, if Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Now we are going to pause on the 24 and I'm going to quickly explain. So Genesis 4 verse 16 tells us about the family of Cain and what happened to Cain after he left the presence of God, after he was cursed for killing his brother. It looks like even though Cain had wronged God, he still was able to move on. This shows us that God does not force himself on people and does not force things on people. And also, he left Cain to continue to build his life. It says that Cain went away from the presence of God to the land of Nod on the east of Eden. The land of Nod, so from verse 4 to 16, the land of Nod is like a term for vagabond, a land of like naughty people. So in that city, he bore a child named Enoch. And Cain and his wife had Enoch, built a city, and named that city Enoch after his child. And Enoch also begat other kids, and about 6 generations after Cain was Lamech. Lamech grew up and changed everything. He, instead of one man to one wife, he started polygamy. So it looks like polygamy started with Lamech. He took to himself 2 wives. So this was all explained over here to tell us the kind of things that are not approved of God. So firstly, Cain left the presence of God, meaning that Cain no longer served God. So things that was going on in Cain's home that is not approved of God was listed here for us to have an idea of the things that God does not approve. I believe that that's why they listed all these things. Not that maybe their careers or anything was not approved of God, but certain things that they were doing listed here is showing us that it came from Cain's generation or descendants. So Lamech took for himself 2 wives. Instead of the one man, one wife, he changed it to 2 wives, creating polygamy. Also, it says here that the name of one wife of Lamech was Ada, and the second was Zillah. And Ada bore a kid named Jabal. And Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So I believe that they kind of explained this too for us to know that, these were people working just like God's people. They felt blessed just like God's people, just that they were not in the presence of God. So mostly, even in our generations now, I can say that not everyone who seems to be blessed is blessed of God. This is kind of what I believe this was trying to show us, that not everyone doing the same work as you is of God. Not everyone getting certain blessings that you feel that you're getting from God is of God. So it says over here that they had a child, Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So he had a life like every other person who knew God, okay? And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the harp and flute. And when in those days, whenever they tell you that someone was the father, it means that like they were experts, So it says that Jubal, even though Jubal was a descendant of Cain, was an expert in harp and flute too. They are not all of God. Some people are of other things and other beliefs. This is what I believe, why they kind of went further to explain the careers of these people. So we know that even though God had cursed Cain and he had left God's sight, things were still going on for him. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. Zillah is another wife of Lamech, the second wife of Lamech, and the second wife bore a child named Tubal-Cain, and Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Then Lamech said to his wives, and Lamech is about 3 to 6 generations after Cain, the original Cain, who killed Abel. And according to this story right here, it shows that Lamech was worse than Cain. And he kind of boasted with it. So then Lamech said to his wives in verse 23, he seemed to be one that liked to brag. Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain, so he was referring to his great-great-great-grandparent Cain. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. So he was kind of bragging about killing someone for hurting him. And I believe that he made the statement that if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then himself, he's going to be avenged 77-fold to show the level of evilness that he is capable of or he's done. Which brings us to an end on Genesis chapter 4. So it brings us to a new story, Genesis 4 verse 25. It talks about Adam and Eve having a new son. Recapping from the first story, there were two sons, Cain and Abel. So Cain seemed to be the naughty kid and Abel was the good kid. And Abel was killed. So now there were no traits of good people after Adam and Eve's kids because it was left with Cain. And Cain and his family lived continual evil for a while until Adam and Eve had a new son in verse 25. So it talks about the new son. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel. This was according to Eve, whom Cain killed. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord again. So this gives us a summary of why we have people who believe in all other kind of beliefs, because it shows us that before the new son, people were not calling on the name of God like they were supposed to. They were doing things their way. They were worshiping other gods. They were, living their life according to their way or their will. Then God blessed Adam and Eve with another child who started another generation that started calling on the name of God. I did make some notes over here that we could quickly go over. Cain's generation, even though he was cursed, he was able to build a whole city, which he named after his son, Enoch. And many generations that came after Cain, and 6 generations after, they even did worse than Cain did. Lamech, who was full of evil, seemed to be the first to practice polygamy. And he changed God's pattern of a man to a wife, to a man to 2 wives. And he also killed more than Cain, according to him. Lamech even bragged about killing like a man and a young man for hurting him, and the judgment that will come on his avengers, saying that if Cain was 7-fold, his avengers would experience 77. The history of Adam, Eve, and Cain after Abel's death was full of sinners who did not follow God's path, until God blessed Eve with another appointed child named Seth to replace the loss of Abel, who respected God. It also shows us that Seth's generation, on the other hand, were full of people who called on God. Seth's new generation, on the other hand, they were full of people who called on God. So the moral of this story, I believe that we sometimes, as people of God or believers of God, wonder how people just detest God. He has not done anything wrong to humans. God does not need us humans. We need him, okay? But some people just detest God. He has not done anything to hurt you. Why do you just detest him so much? And today, reading this story from Genesis 4, verse 15 or 16 to 25, it shows us that there were actually people, even in those days, who felt God's presence more. There were people who were not followers of God. They're descendants of the family of Cain, okay? And this makes it no longer surprising that these descendants of Cain are still in our current generation. People who are full of evil, sometimes people do so much evil that you wonder if they're humans. These people could be descendants of Cain. They have made up their mind to be full of evil, and they do not believe in God. If they existed in the earlier generation, which was closer to God's time, then there are more of them in this generation. So what do you do as a believer to protect yourself from these type of evil people, people set out to do evil? So these people have made up their minds to practice evil and stay away from God in our generation due to what their descendants believed. And it tells us that they were not calling on the name of God. So the belief, whatever they were calling on, is what they believe. And they have trained their kids, generations after generations to our date. So as you are training someone to follow God, another person is actually training their kid to start using guns in school. They're just full of evil, to training their kids to just hurt other people. So first we need to stay prayed up. Pray to God. He's the only one who can protect us from evil people. And it is also up to believers of God to decide that or discern from someone's actions and words if they're people of God or people of evilness. You need to be able to discern. And with all this, God gives the power to do this. So stay prayed up to God is the moral story, to be able to tell if this person is of evil or of God. So this is our word for today, and this brings us to an end in the book of, not the book of Genesis, the story on Cain. This brings us to an end on the story of Cain. And this was one lesson that hopefully stays with us. And I'm going to see you in our next series on the family of Adam. Stay blessed, and thanks for watching Sandy's Insight. Love you. Bye.